we're going to be talking about understanding ADHD and the neurological reasons why students with the ADHD often struggle. And we're going to talk about engaging students in the classroom. So ADHD is quite a complex neurobiological disorder.
It is also a disorder that is poorly understood. However, if we take an overarching look at the literature and take into consideration the lived experience voice, we can put together a picture of what is likely to be going on for children and adults with ADHD. However, in 1 hour, it is impossible for me to discuss all the aspects of ADHD, so we're going to be focusing on one aspect during this presentation.
So the disorder affects an individual's ability to exert age-appropriate self-control. It's characterised by persistent and developmentally inappropriate patterns of hyperactive, impulsive and inattentive behaviour, and is frequently accompanied by emotional regulation challenges. Now, ADHD tends to be a lifelong disorder and it can cause significant disability. And while the disorder actually responds really well short-term to medication and treatment, in the long term, evidence for long-term effectiveness actually remains quite elusive and long-term outcome predictions still remain poor. At school, students with ADHD tend to underperform academically, and this is despite their actual ability. The Australian Child and Adolescent Survey of Mental Health and Wellbeing in 2005 found that ADHD is the most common mental disorder found in Australian school children. They also found that 50% of students with ADHD achieve less than the national minimum standard during NAPLAN testing. In adulthood, ADHD is a risk factor for comorbid mental health challenges, physical health challenges including coronary heart disease, sleeping problems, migraines and dental caries, relationship and marriage breakdown and divorce, negative occupational outcomes, loss of employment and financial difficulties, driving infringements, car accidents, mental trauma, traumatic brain injury and premature death, self-harm and suicide ideation, attempts and completion, violence, criminality and incarceration, and reduced quality of life and life expectancy. So it is a very significant disorder. In their study examining the symptom perception of children with ADHD, Werner found that children with the disorder viewed their most problematic behaviours as being uncontrollable, embarrassing, and bothersome to others. They also felt the public stigma associated with their disorder. Now, this is really concerning because if you think back to attribution theory, it says that individuals who tend to feel they're incapable of changing negative behaviour they perceive to be uncontrollable. So if you think that your behaviour is uncontrollable, you're less likely to even try to change it because you don't think that that's possible. Additionally, public stigma has been found to lead to self-stigma or the internalisation of a new degraded identity that negatively impacts self-esteem, social functioning and quality of life. And sadly, these traits appear to be very prevalent in the ADHD adult community. Adults with the disorder often report a history of experiencing repeated failure despite their best efforts, receiving constant correction, redirection and criticism due to not being able to meet their expectations based on them by parents, teachers, friends, spouses or partners and employees, and being subject to social rejection and isolation. Additionally, adults with ADHD tend to report low levels of self-esteem, self-efficacy, mental well-being and quality of life satisfaction and enjoyment. Two systemic reviews have concluded that adults with ADHD generally exhibit low global self-esteem relative to healthy controls, regardless of gender. And multiple studies have showed that adults with ADHD are prone to self-medicating with illicit substances, a way of dealing with their emotional impact of their symptoms. And the risk of suicide ideation and completion is much higher in the ADHD community. And I'd like to think all of us, parents, teachers, advocates, we all play a very significant part in changing these outcomes. So ADHD tends to present in three ways. You've got the predominantly hyperactive impulsive traits, the predominantly inattentive traits, and the combined ones. So students with hyperactive impulsive traits tend to be described as race cars. It's like their brains are really, really quick. They're darting off everywhere. They're quick to respond, to take action, but their brakes don't work very well. So they crash and burn often. Students with predominantly inattentive symptoms are often described as being off with the fairies. These kids can have slow processing speed, not all the time, but if they do, it takes them longer to understand concepts and complete work. Now, there's certainly boys that can be inattentive. However, it is predominantly associated with girls. And because girls and inattentive symptoms tend to not stand out as much, they don't present the same way, that they are actually very much at risk of not being diagnosed and accurately treated for their disorder. We've found that by the time they get to high school, a lot of girls with undiagnosed ADHD start getting diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and their primary disorder is never picked up. And students with combined ADHD, like me, who won the lotto, and my son, which is the most common type, we present with a combination of both hyperactive impulsive and inattentive tendencies. And as the hyperactive impulsive tendencies tend to be more noticeable, we tend to describe it as being like race cars as well. Now, students can present with mild, moderate or severe impairment, and for this reason, ADHD is considered to be a spectrum disorder. But regardless of our prominent traits, what the research shows is that individuals with ADHD experience excessive mind wandering, and they're frequently interrupted by unrelated spontaneous thoughts. And these thoughts kind of hijack us and take us off track. And then we get this tangential thinking, and all of a sudden we make connections that wouldn't make sense to anybody else, and we're out of there. Now, there is some evidence to show that this possibly may be a better predictor of ADHD than the general hyperactive, impulsive or inattentive traits that I refer to now. However, it's really important to realise that these traits are just the tip of the iceberg. Students with ADHD present with cognitive and executive function challenges. So when it comes to executive function challenges, executive functions are the abilities that you use to regulate and monitor your words, thoughts, actions and emotions. They help you to self-motivate, to delay gratification, to perceive time, and kind of take action over time so you can achieve your goals. And that's what children and students with ADHD struggle with. Students with ADHD develop their executive functions 30% behind their peers, so they don't have the same capacity to regulate as people of their peer age in the same classroom. So that's such a big deal when a child's 8. Their executive function age at that time might be sitting around 5.5, 6. But because there is actually children in the class that will be more mature and some that will be less mature, you don't stand out so much. You'll see it, but it's not so noticeable. But when students with ADHD get to 15, that executive function gap is much more noticeable. So you'll find like they might have an executive function capacity of a 10 or 11-year-old in a class where people are 15 and they're expected to self-regulate and manage, keeping up on time, on top of assignments, organising themselves, that they do not have the ability to do that. They haven't developed it as yet. So without scaffolding and support, it's impossible for them not to fail. When it comes to cognitive challenges, students with ADHD often have problems with memory storage and retrieval, and the cognitive deficits that we present with are only starting to get more information about them now. During this presentation, we're predominantly going to focus on motivation and the influence that reward and interest has on a students with ADHD's ability to engage in the classroom. Be that with their teacher, with the subject, with the work that's allocated to them, with other students. But even though we're only going to focus on that area, because ADHD is so complex, it's absolutely impossible for me in an hour to really give you a really deep understanding of ADHD. I think it's more valuable to have a deep understanding of one area than a superficial understanding of everything. Just always remember that what you learn today is only part of the picture. It's only a little piece of that iceberg. And there's lots of other reasons why they can struggle at school as well. We also need to remember that students with ADHD, a very high percentage of them, will actually present with coexisting conditions as well. And they also need to be diagnosed and treated and supported. And most importantly, if the only thing you walk away with today is the understanding that ADHD is a neurological or neurodevelopmental disorder, it is not a behaviour disorder. There is overwhelming and irrefutable evidence that shows the symptomatic behaviour displayed by kids with ADHD is beyond their own making and ability to control. That instead their symptoms stem from genetic differences that result in alterations in brain development, structure, connectivity and function, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain, which is the area of the brain responsible for their mental abilities required for self-regulation or self-control. Now, ADHD is classified in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as a neurodevelopmental disorder. It sits along autism and global developmental delay. So please never think that it's a behaviour disorder, because that runs us into problems straight away, because how we actually perceive a child's behaviour has a huge impact on the way that we respond to them. So the behaviour that you see in children with ADHD are symptoms of their disorder. Like I said, they are beyond their ability of the student to control or to change. They arise from an impaired ability to inhibit and regulate attention, behaviour and emotions, to reliably recall information in the moment, to plan and problem solve, to self-reflect and self-monitor, and to self-soothe. And they are due to underlying neurological differences that affect brain development, structure, connectivity and function. Now, for example, the research indicates that children with ADHD have decreased volumes of white matter and grey matter and possibly microscopic changes in these regions. The other thing that's been shown is that children with ADHD have reduced levels of neurotransmitters, namely dopamine and noradrenaline, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So it's thought that ADHD robs you of the abilities that other people use to navigate the world. For example, ADHD robs you of the ability to make a willful choice. Because to be able to make a willful choice, you need to first be able to pause. So you need to stop, turn your attention inwards. You need to start contemplating this future in this working space. You need to protect this space from interruption by having really good filters. You need to be able to bring in information that gets you to, generate some new ideas. So you might go, last time this happened, I did that, or I had someone do this and this happened, or I read this book and they advised that. And with those ideas, create some new ones, do kind of a cost-weight analysis and action a response. All those things are extremely challenging for someone with ADHD. Most of us are wired for thought action, thought words coming out of our mouth, and without medication are unable to pause. If we can't pause, then we can't stop and even recall information that we've learnt before. We can't tap into what our goals and values and what's important to us. We have basically an instinctual habitual response, which can be dangerous or not appropriate at certain times. We can struggle, when people are actually contemplating the future in this working memory space, while people's filters work really well. Ours tend to work really badly without medication. I remember the other night my partner and I said goodnight and we're about to fall asleep and the dog started eating kibble in the bathroom. And I turned to Ian and said, all my brain can do now is hear Ollie eating. There's no way I can go to sleep. I'll have to wait till he finishes. And Ian goes, I can just screen that out, and he just went to sleep. We just don't have that ability to change our attention like other people do. We also get constantly interrupted by irrelevant thoughts that can hijack us and take us off track. So our filters don't work to protect this space very well. We also might not get the information we need in the moment and can have planning and problem solving challenges. So that's just a little insight into some of the things that can be going on for us. So we need to remember at all times that children would if they could. Children with ADHD are not trying to be difficult, they're not trying to be challenging, nor are they intentionally rude, naughty, impulsive, lazy, distracted, or unmotivated. Instead, these behaviours are an expression of their ADHD symptoms. They're out of their ability to control, and they are not of their own making. And for this reason, discipline will not rectify any of the challenges students with ADHD present with. Telling a student with an ADHD to do something differently does not mean they know how to do that something differently. You cannot teach them to do something that they've not yet developed the executive function capacity to achieve. You can only provide scaffolding, patient guidance, and support. And punishing children with ADHD for a behaviour that's symptomatic of their developmental delay and lagging self-regulation skills will not achieve, under any circumstances, the results that you might be after. It will only leave you feeling more and more frustrated, whilst at the time crush the student's self-esteem, self-worth, love for learning. It'll foster shame and exacerbate their challenges. It can also contribute to students with ADHD becoming opposition and defiant. Now, many experts say that, or they believe that children with ADHD receive 20,000 more negative messages before the age of 12 than other children. And as you can imagine, if you find yourself constantly on the receiving end of criticism, redirection, punishment, rejection, you're going to start living on the edge of the fight or flight response, just waiting for the next time that you're going to be in trouble. And when you're in that space, you do one of two things. You either go in and attack yourself internally and develop anxiety and depression, or you go to self-preservation mode and you attack outwardly to stop any pain coming back in. I'm going to take it out on you and react. And unfortunately, this kind of thing is what happens to kids with ADHD, because they hear constantly all this stuff that after a while they just give up, and then we've lost them. So it's really important. We still want them to have the same outcome. We still want them to achieve, to do their best, to have manners, to be great people who contribute to society. But the way that they get there needs to be different. And if we want them to learn, sometimes we need to teach them in a way that is indirect. So we're giving them explicit teaching because they don't pick up things implicitly, but in a way that's not going to trigger the fight response. So we might not be able to go, okay, you've got really bad manners, you need to start using your manners. Where are they? We're better off teaching them like, oh, I love manners, love great manners, like are really lovely. People who have nice manners make me always feel really special. I like being around them. You role model, you talk about it, but you're teaching explicitly so they learn and can pick those things up without the risk of going into the fight or flight response. I'm going to digress a little bit, but when kids go into the fight or flight response at school, what happens is their amygdala fires, cortisol pumps through their bloodstream, and they get increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, increased breathing. Their muscles will tense up with blood, ready to fight or flee. They'll get pinpoint pupils, and their body will divert energy away from non-essential organs such as the gut. Now, the brain considers the prefrontal cortex, the primary home of the executive functions, as non-essential, because during that fight or flight process, you need big picture thinking, not little picture thinking. So if a child with ADHD goes into the fight or flight response and you're trying to, give them information or tell them to do something differently or giving them a lecture, they are unable to regulate, to stop themselves, to calm down and learn. In fact, it just sounds like blah, blah, and they're going to explode even more. So part of our way of helping kids with ADHD is to prevent, talking to them or educating them, doing things that are likely to put them into the fight or flight response. So bringing them on side. We'll talk about listening with empathy later. But being really conscious that this is not something they can control. And if we lose it, how on earth can we expect someone who's got no self-regulatory capacity to not lose it as well? We need to be the adult in this situation and pull it back for them and help them settle. To prevent adverse outcomes, we need to do a couple of things. We need to either adjust the expectations we place upon them, so they're in line with their executive function age rather than their peer or chronological age. Or, even better, we need to put in place strategies that bridge the gap between their executive function age and their peer or chronological age, so that they can meet the expectations placed upon them in the classroom, access the curriculum at the same basis as their peers, and achieve success. We also need to very slowly and very gently start fostering in the students self-awareness, self-acceptance and self-compassion, as well as the knowledge and skills they need to one day negotiate life successfully with ADHD and thrive. And we need to do this in the long term, not the short term, because ADHD is a chronic lifelong condition. So how does the underlying pathophysiology associated with ADHD influence the student with ADHD's ability to self-motivate and engage in the classroom? And like I said, we're going to be talking about a small aspect of ADHD today because it's impossible to go into depth about all parts of the disorder because it's such a complex disorder, but it is a very important part. So more specifically, we're going to be examining the reward-dopamine pathway, or the role reward prediction or interest plays in dopamine availability in the student with ADHD and ability to focus and pay attention, to take and maintain action, to recall and manipulate information using their working memory. So noradrenaline and dopamine are neurotransmitters. Now, dopamine is more important than noradrenaline in many aspects because it's the precursor for noradrenaline. You can't have noradrenaline if you don't have dopamine because it's made from dopamine. So dopamine is associated with reward-driven motivation and cognitive alertness, where noradrenaline with vigilant attentiveness. So in the picture that's up there at the moment, those blue dots represent the neurotransmitters or dopamine. So they're like chemical messengers that carry information in the form of electrical impulses from one nerve to the next across the presynaptic junction. So where those dots are sitting is in the presynaptic junction. So what would happen is the nerve impulse would go across the nerve, and then one of those blue dots, being a neurotransmitter, would pick it up and carry it to the next nerve. It would transfer across the nerve, and the next neurotransmitter would pick it up and carry it to the next nerve. And that's how, anytime that you're thinking, what actually has to happen is that a range of electrical impulses have to go back and forwards across the brain. Anytime we want to use our brain function, we want to think, use our executive functions, etc. And like I said, the thing that people with ADHD really struggle with the most are our executive functions, mental processes that individuals rely on to monitor and control their thoughts, words, actions and emotions, to self-motivate, to delay gratification, to kind of perceive time and to regulate their behaviour across time. And so to use them, the electrical impulses have to go back and forwards. Now, individuals with ADHD have been shown to have low levels of dopamine and noradrenaline within the nerve synapse of the brain. So when someone with ADHD is doing something that is just normal, everyday life, not particularly interesting, something that's tedious or boring, something they've been asked to do or told to do or think that they should do, they have low levels of dopamine in the nerve synapse. So what happens is when the electrical impulses need to get through, if there is no dopamine to pick up the electrical impulse to carry it to the next one, the nerve transmission is stopped. So people with ADHD will often say to you, I know I should do something, but I can't. And they literally can't, because if there is no dopamine there to carry the nerve impulse across to the next nerve, they cannot access their executive functions, those self-regulatory capacity. They're actually stuck. So if you see a child with ADHD who's bored, boredom is really dangerous when you've got ADHD, and we say, wow, there's so much to do, go and play with all these toys and go and do this, this and this, and you notice they actually can't move. To actually be able to move and go and entertain yourself, or even to be interested in one of those things that someone suggested to you, you need to have dopamine. They don't have any, so they can't just get off the couch and go and do something. The only way that we can help them is to actually engage them and bring them with us. Okay, so without that dopamine and that inability to self-regulate, you're going to see the symptomatic behaviour that you associate with the student having ADHD. So they're going to struggle to focus and concentrate on information or tasks. They're going to be easily distracted by external stimulus or irrelevant thoughts. They're going to struggle to remember information, to pay close attention to detail. They can miss important instructions or information. They could even be reluctant to engage in tasks because doing something that's boring is like, oh my God, it's hell on earth. Believe me, I know. They can find it challenging to self-motivate, to maintain effort over time, and they can really struggle to inhibit their words, actions, and emotions. Now, the other thing that affects the amount of dopamine that people have in the nerve synapse is actually interest. So the research suggests that you get dopamine when you perceive the reward or the value or interest in something that you're going to do to be worthwhile. You see it as being, this reward I'm going to get is just amazing, and the amount of effort that I have to put into doing it is absolutely worth it. And the reward slightly grows, because if the reward was the same all the time, you'd lose interest. So when there's this disparity there and you think, yep, it's really worth it, you get dopamine. Everybody does. But because people with ADHD have low levels of dopamine, that rise in dopamine is much more significant. When you get dopamine, all of a sudden you can focus and concentrate. You can take action. You can maintain your action. It gives you energy. You can use your working memory in the moment on what you're focusing on. And basically, it gives you motivation to keep going. So when students with ADHD are doing something they're really interested in, you will notice that they can engage. When they're doing something that they're not interested in, they can't. And some people will go, well, it must be willful because, you know, they could do it this moment, they can't do it now. But ADHD symptoms are extremely situational variable, because if you're interested and you've got dopamine, you can do something, and if you're not interested and haven't got dopamine, you can't. You'll also notice that when someone with ADHD is doing something they really like, they can have trouble transitioning away. You can get very hyper focused on something. So say you saw a kid with ADHD and they're playing with Lego on the ground, and then their mum says to them, hey mate, it's time for dinner, come and sit at the table for me. And the child looks at their mum and goes, yeah, sure mum, and then looks back at their Lego. In 2 seconds, they've forgotten what mum's even said. They don't get a flash of the image of their mind of their mum's angry face going, get to the table now, or, you know, mum's going to explode. They can't self-soothe and go, breathe. It's going to be okay. I can come back to this and I can play with it later. Move your body, your attention, your actions to the table right now, that kind of stuff. Then mum comes along and rips the toy away and the child has an emotional breakdown. Now, that child is not throwing a tantrum. Severing that dopamine is painful. We've actually caused that emotional breakdown. So it's important to understand that it's not easy for kids with ADHD to just transition. If we want them to transition, we kind of need to come and help them. So mum could have come down, talked to the child about, what they've built in the Lego, tell them how much they can't wait to have dinner with them at the table, that maybe they can bring the Lego with them and show their dad, what they've made, talk about it, then put it somewhere so we could all watch it, and observe it while we're making dinner and da-da-da. So you've helped the child transition on the way there. Now, having dopamine in your brain feels good. It's called the happy hormone. You feel positive, you're able to be present in the moment, you can activate, engage, maintain your focus and concentrate, process information, absorb information. You basically feel alive. Whereas low levels of dopamine in the brain is associated with being under-aroused, feeling sluggish, tired, miserable, irritable, hypersensitive. I think boredom equates to feeling like depression. I think it's hell on earth. As a child, I would act out. My mum says that I would pick fights with my dad. As an adult, all I want to do is go to sleep when I'm bored. It is really quite debilitating. So as a result, if children are in that boredom state, their brains can just turn off. So I noticed with my son when we were crisis schooling, without all the structure that's offered at school, having the teacher there, his class and all that, it was like my son, who's actually really quite bright, couldn't even read a question that he had to do and process what it meant. Because without the dopamine, it's like nothing worked. Now, just to explain how significant dopamine affects people with ADHD, just going to tell you a little bit of a story about myself. So when I was a wound care consultant in a hospital a while ago, because I was a nurse for 17 years, when I first got this job, I wanted it so badly that I was like a walking encyclopedia of wounds. Read everything I could, like my knowledge was fantastic. However, about 4.5 years later, when I started getting bored and my son started having problems, I could go and see a wound, not one I'd see every day, but one maybe I wouldn't see for 3 or 4 months. And I could go, I know what that wound is, but I can't get it out of my brain. And I just can't remember what you do with it. It was like the connection had gone. I even went to the doctor and said, am I getting Alzheimer's or something? And they didn't know what was going on at the time. So this interesting and this dopamine is extremely significant. So when a child is bored, doesn't matter what we do, they cannot just focus and concentrate. They can't just complete their work or focus on information or process information. They basically get stuck, and all the prompting in the world doesn't necessarily help. We need to actually engage with them. The other thing is that when students with ADHD are not interested in engaged in a classroom and receive no assistance, they may be compelled without mindful consent to engage in inappropriate activities in order to increase their dopamine levels. If your brain doesn't get dopamine in a healthy way, it will automatically seek dopamine in an unhealthy way. So they may begin to act out, to display behaviour, to try and seek attention or, a reaction. They may participate in risky behaviour as a form of mental stimulation. So it's really important that we try to intervene and make sure that their brain is engaged and that they receive dopamine. So how do we do that? How do we increase dopamine levels in kids in the class? So first of all, it's harnessing the power of interest. So kids can have enormous strengths, and the strengths are usually actually attached in some ways to interest. So using them helps engagement. So does things like injecting urgency, humour, fun, creativity, competition can actually make things more interesting as well. Now, there is a bit of a challenge. So some children with competition thrive. Other people with competition will actually close down and go into fear mode, etc. So you have to engage with the child and work out what's best for them. So other ways that we can bring topics alive. So we can try to work out with the child how that topic could be important to them. Can we relate it to something that they're actually interested in? I know for my son, he loves Pokemon, Ninja Warrior, Lego dogs, things like that. That kind of thing will help him gain interest in what he's doing and things come alive. Engaging the student in a conversation about, the task at hand, making it fun by using different colours, allowing students to maybe photograph, draw, film, voice record answers or complete tasks on an iPad. Can you turn the task into a game, sing, chant, dance, whatever it is to help them learn? Can you provide them with a map or an easy quiz? So find and do these sums and walk here and then do this work. And so it's like a quiz or a mind map that gets you to a certain place. You can experiment with using timers and other games. Some children with a timer will love it. It's a competition. Other kids will close down. The next thing we can do is offer lots of praise. Children with ADHD can't get enough praise. Praise gives you dopamine, and the praise needs to be constant in the moment, and it helps you to stay motivated and to activate your brain. And when I say copious, I mean buckets full. You cannot basically give them enough. You have to saturate them in praise for it to mean anything. So ideas for giving praise can be to catch students doing things really well. Use emotive words such as excellent, outstanding, brilliant, extraordinary, amazing, superstar, awesome. I know my son came home one day and he said to me, I just got good. Teacher just said something I did was good. And for Jack, that was like, what was the point? He's like, didn't get outstanding or fantastic, so why bother? So their words actually mean a lot to them. You can tell the child that, or the student, that you're really proud of them and describe in detail, what you're giving praise for. During quiet times, you can use behaviour acknowledgement cards to provide feedback. You create a brand diary for the student to take home to share with their family that shows that, their exemplary or desired behaviours and how they role model them in class to reinforce them. Now, praise can also be used as a way of providing positive, motivating redirection for students with ADHD, say if they become distracted, or to prevent them going to fight or flight response. So say a child with ADHD has got distracted in the class. If you go on, mate, back to work, they've received a negative message. If you go, oh, mate, you've been doing such a great job, I can't wait to see the finished result, you're going to get the same outcome, but with a positive message. So saying things like, great job, keep going. Last time you did that project, it was so fantastic. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. Will help that stimulation. Please forget of expecting self-motivation from kids with ADHD. Instead, we need to use rewards. To be able to self-motivate, there's lots of things that you need to be able to do which are available to students with ADHD. Some of it comes from lack of self-awareness that's deep-seated. Sometimes they've got memory recall, they can't even remember what they were interested or motivated to do at the time. They struggle to inhibit their attention, to self-soothe. All these factors come into play. So we need to take over and use rewards. So rewards need to be in the currency of the child. No point offering a child with ADHD reward that they're really not that interested in, because it will do little. Some ideas include time to draw, time to make, a stop motion or a film, giving them tokens that they exchange for a desired outcome at home, so like a Pokemon toy or an outing, or at school, rubber, pencils, balloon, bubbles, etc. Jigsaw pieces. Once there was a time when my son was really, really struggling at school with boredom, and I would buy Pokemon, I would get a picture off the internet, I would print it out, cut it into jigsaw pieces so the teacher all through the day could give him one piece of the jigsaw. And that helped to motivate him, and at the end of the day, he got the Pokemon. But it was a way of bringing dopamine or giving him dopamine in that moment. There was one class that my son was in where the teacher was amazing and she paid the students to come to school. So they had to hire their desks, they got paid money for doing certain jobs in the classroom, they got paid money for rewards, and she had a gift shop that was open once a month, I think, and then twice a year there was an auction where you could use the money. But that money gave her an ability to always give praise to the kids, to motivate them. It would have helped all the students in the classroom, but it really helped, the children in the classroom with ADHD. Now, sometimes it's very difficult to give children dopamine because you just can't find the right tool and stuff. And sometimes they just have to do work that's not interesting. So we have to sometimes bring in external strategies. I remember one year we put a little mini tramp outside my son's class for a term. And so when he was struggling to engage, he could go outside, jump on the mini tramp for 5 minutes, and then go back into the classroom. So it's any way to get dopamine. My son's struggling at school at the moment with boredom again, and so we've arranged with the teacher that he can actually draw between subjects as when he's transitioning, and different things that we can do to try and support him. Now, there is nothing that is going to engage a student more in the classroom and build interest than your relationship with them. Your relationship is basically everything. Because if you make a child feel heard, valued, appreciated, they actually want to meet your expectations. They want to do the right thing. And sometimes that can push you past boring things. So I'm going to give you an example from home because I'm not a teacher. But if I say to my 11-year-old son, can you please go and empty the dish for me? He will basically go, sure, Mum, and goes and does it. And he's got very significant ADHD. I have never rewarded him for doing it, and I have never punished him for not doing it. They aren't even, rewards and punishments don't even exist in our house. Rewards do to a certain extent, but more to do with the relationship, and they're only brought out in really desperate times where he's really struggling and anything else to get dopamine's not working. But the reason he will go and do it, even though the dishwasher's boring, he's got no dopamine from doing it, is the connection that we fostered around it by explicit teaching about when he does that, it makes me as his mum, who does so much for him, feel loved and appreciated and respected, and that it's really important to work as a team as part of our family and da-da-da-da. And so that awareness and that connection and that relationship is what gives him the dopamine and the desire to do the right thing. So don't underestimate that your relationship in the classroom with the student is going to have your biggest influence on their outcome. One of the best things that you can do to actually foster the relationship is to listen with empathy when the child is struggling. And you can listen with empathy that shows that you're understanding without condoning the behaviour. And I know that's not always possible when you're in, say, a busy classroom and all the things are going on, and maybe the child's getting really struggled. But if they've got a quiet place that they can go to, and when recess comes and everyone's gone, and you can walk up and go, hey mate, what's going on? I can see you're upset. And they're able to go, oh, it was really sucked, da da da, and you can go, I know that would have been really hard. It's really difficult, isn't it? Sometimes it might be sharing, or it might be doing this or doing something that you don't like doing. The child's going to feel like their feelings have been validated. And then you can move slowly into the part where you go, so what do you think might help? And actually fostering them planning and problem solving skills and self-awareness, and collaboratively work with what they can do next time in a situation, all knowing it might not work, but it's trying to build that relationship and that understanding. Whereas if they're struggling and we just don't want to hear it, we brush it over it, that's not true, you just have to get on with it, we actually decrease that connection. They feel more alone. We can foster shame because it's inappropriate to feel that way, and it doesn't help them, in the long run. And I really need to highlight that your relationship with them has more of an effect on their outcome than anything else. Now, there's lots of questions. I'm just going to say, please do not take recess away. If you've got a child that's got low levels of dopamine in their brain and they've been struggling to regulate in the classroom and they need a dopamine top-up, and you take their recess away, you've literally disabled them more. They've got no way now of getting dopamine and coming back into the classroom to regulate. So don't look at it as like a punishment and a reward. It is a necessary thing for the kids to move, to use their bodies and their imagination or whatever it is to top up those dopamine stores, so they have much better opportunity to come in to the classroom and settle and to be able to focus and concentrate. And sometimes what kids with ADHD need with you more than anything else is not on your lesson plan. So I'm going to scroll to the top of the questions.